To this day, the operetta The Merry Widow endures in popularity, with frequent productions being staged in both English and German. It is the only major hit of the Edwardian era to remain so relevant. From the 1890s to the First World War, the Edwardian musical comedy genre dominated Europe and America, most of all on English stages. At the time, stars of the theatre enjoyed fame that has not been replicated on the same level since. Musical comedies influenced fashion trends and captured the light-hearted romantic ideals of the comparatively blissful era before the Great War. Although the original Austrian production of The Merry Widow is not an Edwardian musical comedy but an operetta, the immensely successful English adaptation can be considered part of the genre. It launched Elsie, subsequently one of the most famous actresses of the era, into stardom, and some of the changes the English adaptation made to the performance paved the way for future musical trends. The Merry Widow mania that followed the English and American runs also offers an early example of capitalizing on a show's popularity with merchandise. Today we will explore how The Merry Widow became one of the most enduring cultural phenomenons of the Edwardian era and beyond. The Merry Widow premiered in Vienna in 1905 and was an instant success. It tells the story of Hannah Glaveri, a young and wealthy widow who inherits a fortune that could save her bankrupt homeland, the Balkan Principality of Pontevedra. But if Hannah marries a foreigner, her money leaves with her, plunging Pontevedra back into poverty. The story is set in the Pontevedran embassy in Paris. The Pontevedran ambassador Baron Zita schemes to keep Hannah's money in the principality by getting Danilo, the first secretary of the embassy, to marry Hannah. Danilo and Hannah have a history. They were once in love, but his family disapproved and now he refuses to marry her for her money. All the Parisian men want to marry Hannah for her fortune, and Zita puts Danilo in charge of keeping them away. Through a series of hilarious misunderstandings and romantic entanglements, Danilo finally realizes his true feelings for Hannah and the story comes to a happy resolution for all. The Merry Widow is based on an earlier 1861 production with a similar plot called The Embassy Attaché. In early 1905, Leo Stein, a librettist, came across it and thought the play had the makings of a popular operetta, and collaborated with Victor Leon to write a light-hearted and romantic story, where a few details were improved from the original play. Both men had worked for the so-called waltz king Johann Strauss, who was by then deceased. The Merry Widow was set to premiere at the historic Theater an der Wien, where Beethoven had once lived, which was in need of a new hit after a lull in popularity. Initially, Richard Huberger, who had experience in creating operetta scores, was hired to compose the music, but he left the project after both librettists agreed his score wasn't right for The Merry Widow. The secretary of the theatre suggested Austro-Hungarian composer Franz Lehár for the score. Lehar's father had been part of the orchestra at the theatre, as well as travelling frequently for his work as military bandmaster. Thanks to these frequent moves, 22 in total, Franz Lehár was exposed to a diverse array of music as a child. Despite initially being doubted, Lehár perfectly captured the world of The Merry Widow. Waltzes, can-cans, and folk music, among other styles, make for a rich and diverse score that has aged very well, remaining as charming and original today as it was then. Even though the librettists were satisfied with Lehár's work, the manager of the theatre had no confidence in The Merry Widow's success. According to one story, he may have offered Lehár money to give up the project. The production was forced to reuse old costumes and make do with lackluster sets as they were refused proper funding. Nevertheless, from its premiere on the 30th of December 1905, it was a success, overcoming early criticisms and continuing at the Theater an der Wien throughout the spring, changing theatres during the summer before returning in autumn. It ran for 483 performances and was soon translated into Italian, Russian, Swedish and Norwegian, among other languages. The Merry Widow had been seen in Hamburg, Berlin and Budapest by the time George Edwards decided to adapt it for London audiences. Edwards had taken over the management of the famous Gaiety Theatre in the 1880s, and in the 1890s had essentially invented the Edwardian musical comedy genre to great success. In the early 1900s he became the manager of Daly's Theatre, where he put on many long-running hits, but then in 1905 he began taking his inspiration from Europe, to noticeably less acclaim. His finances were suffering when he turned to The Merry Widow in hope of another hit. Edwards initially hired Edward Morton as a librettist, but when his work proved unsatisfactory, Basil Hood, a prolific adapter of operettas, had to rewrite the entire script. He was not given his due credit for some years, however, perhaps out of courtesy to Morton. Basil Hood had worked with Arthur Sullivan of Gilbert and Sullivan fame and found success in writing Savoy operas, but as those went out of fashion, he turned his attention to Edwardian musical comedies. He adapted many operettas successfully, highlighting the comic elements and making adjustments to the plot to suit the tastes of English audiences. In The Merry Widow's case, Hannah was changed to Sonia, Pontevedra itself became Marsovia, and Baron Zita was changed to Baron Popov. The only central player to keep their original name is Danilo, but his title is elevated from Count to Prince, perhaps as a nod to the real person who inspired the character. One character in The Merry Widow is named Niegas, the name of the royal family of Montenegro, which itself bears a resemblance to Pontevedra. The real-life crown prince of Montenegro, who was called Danilo, was the only member of his family who seemed amused by these connections. In an interview, he said that the character's charming and cultured personality was, by no means, inaccurate, although years later Crown Prince Danilo sued MGM Studios for libel when the first screen adaptation of The Merry Widow released in 1925, which does contain a few significant plot changes. He won the case in 1927 and received $4,000, roughly the equivalent to $72,000 today. For the London production, George Edwards and Lehar composed additional songs, some of which are seldom heard in modern revivals. Lily Elsie was cast as Hannah, or Sonia as the character was now known in the English production. Lily had been a child star and found some acclaim in other musical comedies before joining the Daly's Theatre Company as a chorus girl. Before The Merry Widow, Lily usually took over for an actress who had left a production and was billed low in the cast. She was briefly fired from one production by George Edwards himself for throwing a balloon at the audience as a prank, but he eventually rehired her. Edwards had first recognised Lily's star potential in the early 1900s, when she was little more than a chorus girl, and the two had built up a strong professional friendship in the following years. Lily's father had died when she was a teenager, and George Edwards also became a protective kind of father figure in her life, especially when she suffered under the pressures of fame later on in her career. Although his choice in casting the virtually unknown Lily in The Merry Widow was partly motivated by lack of finances to hire a more established star, Edwards clearly believed in her, even when she doubted herself. Before casting Lily, Edwards took her to see The Merry Widow in Berlin, which was the first operetta ever to be recorded, and convinced her to accept the title role, although Lily felt her voice wasn't strong enough for the part. When they returned to London, Edwards had a vocal teacher prepare her for the role. In a dichotomy that strangely faces many performers, Lily was extremely shy and quiet in real life, but a poised and confident actress on stage, when she overcame her nerves and actually appeared, that was. After The Merry Widow's instant success, Lily's stage fright often became too much for her, and she made full use of her understudy, but when she managed to perform, she entranced the audience. It is well known today that actors often feel much more at ease stepping into a role thanks to the wardrobe, and good fashion in general can have a remarkable effect on one's confidence. When Edwards brought Lily to see the acclaimed fashion designer Lucille, Lady Duff Gordon, Lucille commented on Lily's shyness. "I realised that here was a girl who had both beauty and intelligence, but who had never learned how to make the best of herself," said Lucille. So shy and diffident was she in those days that a less astute producer than George Edwards would in all probability have passed her over and left her in the chorus. Lucille designed the costumes for The Merry Widow's English production and dressed Lily personally for many years afterwards, using the famous actress as a way to promote the Lucille brand, much like stars of today represent designers. Lily must have appreciated the sumptuous costumes on a deeper level than most actresses, as her own mother had been a seamstress and even worked in theatre dressing. Lucille began her own career in fashion to support herself and her daughter after her first marriage ended in divorce. She began by working from home as a dressmaker and eventually became the first internationally successful designer based in England, as well as influencing fashion and inventing the fashion show itself. Lucille clearly had a flair for the dramatic. You could say she trained the first runway models who walked on a stage in her designs before an invitation-only audience. Lucille also had a sophisticated mood set with atmospheric lighting and a string band. Lucille pioneered less restrictive fashion. She was known for her elegant and refreshingly simple dresses and modern lingerie. Although it is a modern myth that corsets were always painful to wear, in Edwardian high fashion tight lacing was commonplace. By the mid-1910s, we see designs that reflect the silhouettes Lucille had always favoured, hints of which are present even in the Merry Widow costumes. Lily Elsie was far from her most famous client. Mary Pickford wore Lucille designs and Lucille costumed the Ziegfeld Follies on Broadway from the mid-1910s to the early 1920s. As well as costuming the Merry Widow, Lucille had a hand in coaching Lily for the role by helping her develop the poise and elegance befitting it. In fact, Lucille changed Lily's whole appearance, including her hair. Lily had been popular as a postcard model, and her hairstyle and taste in clothes are markedly different after the Merry Widow. For the part of charming European Danilo, an American comedian called Joseph Coyne was cast. Almost 20 years Lily Elsie's senior, Joseph began his career as a vaudeville performer in New York, before moving on to dramas and finally appearing in a string of Broadway productions, where he became known for his physical comedy, usually playing drunks. In both his appearances on the London stage, he starred alongside Edna May, one of the collection of American actresses at the time to find immense success in England. On Joseph's second time in London, his performance was not only praised above Edna's by critics, but on opening night he caught the eye of George Edwards, who was to make yet another unusual casting decision that surprised no one more than Joseph Coyne himself. After the show ended, George Edwards came to Joseph's dressing room and offered him the part of Danilo. Edwards had a different vision for how the role should be played in comparison with the European productions. Most leading men at the time were handsome and their voices were the strongest part of their performance, but while Joseph Coyne could not sing at all, George Edwards believed his dancing and acting ability as well as his natural charisma would better suit Danilo. Just as with Lily Elsie, Joseph was extremely doubtful his performance would be a success. He had never played a romantic lead before and tried his best to get out of the production, even when he was assured his role would be written in such a way as to excuse him from singing. The idea of relying on his charm alone in such respected musical material terrified him, despite the many people insisting he would be a hit with audiences. Even when Joseph's fears were proven wrong, he continued to dislike his role, although he gave it his best. Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady is often credited as the first appearance of the speaking style of singing, where lines are recited along with the music's rhythm. But that technique was first employed by Joseph Coyne to make up for his absolute lack of musical ability. George Edwards was pleased, but Franz Lehar was not. Lehar planned to conduct the opening night, and when he arrived at the rehearsals, he had no idea the male lead couldn't sing. For the first rehearsal that Lehar witnessed, George Edwards made the excuse that Joseph had a cold, and every time Danilo had a song, Edwards encouraged the actor to save his voice. Eventually, when Lehar became suspicious, Edwards asked Joseph to recite the lines instead of singing them, and when Joseph performed as he had practiced, Edwards suggested to Lehar that the speaking style of singing be kept. It wasn't until the dress rehearsal that the truth was finally revealed, and Lehar protested in horror, "What was this?" Edwards tried to convince the annoyed composer that Joseph was a very funny man, to which Lehar responded, "But I have not written funny music." Eventually, he was won over by the thought of how much money the production would make him, regardless of its faithfulness to the source material, and on opening night, Lehar was so impressed by Joseph's performance that he changed his mind entirely. When Lehar was involved in other Merry Widow productions around the world, he often insisted some of Danilo's songs be recited instead of sung. During the Edwardian era, there were two actresses likely to be the most photographed in the world, Lily Elsie and Gabrielle Ray. Like Lily Elsie, Gabrielle had begun her career as a child and went on to appear in numerous stage productions, as well as touring in shows, making a name for herself as a great beauty and an enchanting dancer. In 1902, George Edwards selected Gabrielle to be the understudy for a popular actress Gertie Miller in The Toreador.
During its successful run at the Gaiety Theatre, Gabrielle played the role numerous times and proved herself worthy of a main role in another production before rising to fame in The Orchid. She delighted audiences by dancing in pink pyjamas while singing the Pink Pyjama Girl song. Edwards cast her in more successful shows, and in at least 2 of them she worked with Lily Elsie, and it appears the two became firm friends. This photo of Gabrielle and Lily at the beach with a mutual friend Roy Sanborn was taken a year before The Merry Widow, and when Gabrielle had few friends left later in her life, it was Lily and Gertie Miller who continued to visit her. Gabrielle was a replacement for the original actress playing Frou Frou, one of the dancers at Maxim's restaurant in The Merry Widow. She soon became a fan favourite thanks to her lively dance on a table, where she was lifted up by 4 men and even did handstands. Although she was not known to be the best actress or singer, no one who saw her could fault her dancing. She moved as though her feet weren't touching the ground, making high kicks look easy. Her makeup skills were also ahead of her time. She'd become a master of painting her face for the stage and camera, using what might be described as an early form of contouring on her nose. The role of Baron Zeta, or Popoff as he was now known in the English production, was given to George Graves, who, like Joseph Coyne, could not sing nor could he dance. His performance was a hit with the audience nonetheless. Josie Collins, who would go on to be a popular musical comedy actress on both the West End and Broadway, was part of the Merry Widow cast for all of 2 nights, presumably as one of the dancers at Maxim's. When the original actress fell ill, Josie stepped in, but her part was cut on the 3rd night, and when she was informed, she cried in George Graves' dressing room, and he gave her some words of encouragement that inspired her. Fifi, another member of the dancers at Maxim's, was originally played by Mabel Phillipson, who went on to have an interesting political career. In 1922, her husband ran in the general election, representing the National Liberal Party, but the result was void. The following year, Mabel ran for the Conservative Party and secured a larger majority than her husband had, becoming the 3rd woman to have a seat on the House of Commons. Her theatre background made her a natural on campaign, and she was always ready to give a witty response to hecklers. Mabel was part of a delegation sent to Italy in 1924, and even met Mussolini, who complimented her beauty. The Merry Widow opened on June 8, 1907 at Daly's Theatre. Ticket sales were a little low and applause was slightly reserved at the beginning of the performance, but by the end the crowd was cheering itself hoarse. Upon hearing this, as she prepared for the 3rd act, Lily Elsie, with her usual oblivious humility, whispered to a castmate, "I think they like us." It was estimated that 1,167,000 people saw The Merry Widow before it closed on July 31, 1909. King Edward VII himself saw it 4 times. It apparently made £1 million at the London box office, and made Franz Lehar a millionaire. Reportedly, on a single night across Europe, The Merry Widow was playing to great acclaim in 400 theatres. After the successful opening night, audiences gradually grew as word of mouth spread, and soon The Merry Widow became an inescapable cultural phenomenon. Merry Widow hats are perhaps the most memorable trend to come from the London production. The wide-brimmed Gainsborough hat teeming with feathers that Lily wore in the 3rd act soon caught on as a must-have fashion item. So many women wore Merry Widow hats it spawned many jokes that were often printed on postcards. Notices were put up at theatres for ladies to remove their hats, such were their size. One of the mocking postcards reads, "What takes 4 hands to lift it? What's larger than your flat? What's detested by all men? Why, that Merry Widow hat." The music of The Merry Widow also became extremely popular. The waltz in particular soon became so inescapable it led singer Billy Murray to create an amusing song called "I'm Looking for the Man Who Wrote the Merry Widow Waltz," where he seeks revenge on the man responsible for the earworm melody. "I'm looking for the man that wrote the Merry Widow Waltz. If I chance to find him, he'll need more than smelling salts. He'll never write another, he'll think of home and mother." The Merry Widow is quite possibly the first example of a musical receiving merchandise. Merry Widow corsets, cigars, scarves, and even a popular cocktail followed the hat craze. After The Merry Widow received a Broadway adaptation, even Merry Widow-themed food such as steaks, salads, and chocolates were sold. Although it was not the longest-running production, in London The Merry Widow received a run of 778 performances, and it was reported some people had seen it over 100 times. Lily Elsie had grown up in Manchester, and in 1908 so many people had written to George Edwards begging for her to play Sonia in the Manchester production that Lily obliged and appeared in her native city for a week in October. On the final night of the London run, George Edwards and cast stood behind a vast row of flowers lining the front of the stage, and Edwards announced the ending of the show. The audience erupted into cries of "We love Lily Elsie, who loves Lily Elsie, I do," a cheering send-off after such a remarkable run. As a consolation, Edwards also announced that soon he would produce another musical comedy called The Dollar Princess. The Dollar Princess went on to be another hit. The book was once again written by Basil Hood and Adrian Ross. It starred Lily Elsie and Joseph Coyne as love interests once again, and Gabrielle Ray was also part of the cast. The Merry Widow was undoubtedly the zenith point of its stars' careers, and the London production is often remembered as the crowning achievement of the musical comedy genre. Although its success would never fully be replicated, the majority of the cast went on to have successful careers, although after the war many faded into obscurity and battled personal issues, especially Lily Elsie and Gabrielle Ray, who remained lifelong friends. The frequent revivals and enduring popularity of the Merry Widow's music allow us a glimpse into an era we can say with certainty shall never come again. A time of innocence when it came to romance, of light-heartedness and some might say the illusion of freedom that would soon be shattered by the Great War. By the time the world was recovering from the unprecedented horrors of World War I, Edwardian musical comedy and its stars were truly out of fashion, and had been replaced by the faces of the silver screen, where one star might be seen at thousands of cinemas at once. The cultural importance of the theatre may have changed a great deal from the Edwardian era, but in recent years a renewed interest has been shown in that time so entirely different from our own, and who knows, perhaps other hits of the past may yet be given a chance to shine once more. Thank you for watching, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe so you never miss another one. Please comment any ideas for future videos. Until next time.